I may have told you one time about the woman who spoke to me at the door as she was leaving. She had never been here before, and she hasn't come back. But she spoke to me at the door. Her husband had come out in front of her, and he had some nice words to say, and then she walked up and got right in my face. She wasn't ugly about it. She just was very direct, and she said, "I liked your sermon, didn't like the music." I said, well, and it was one of those, I was so thankful I thought of it, and not 10 minutes later I said, well, come back next week. It won't be the same. We work real hard to keep it fresh. And thank you for bringing a dose of freshness today to us. Yes. It's fresh. It's not new. I recognize some songs from a long, long time ago. Songs my father taught me, or at least I heard him sing and play. But we appreciate our connection to history and to our ancestors, to times gone by. But at the end of the day, we see ourselves as 21st century people who are fairly far advanced of all of those who came before us, don't we? I mean, think about things. How many of you rode a horse to church service this morning? Now, a few of you live close enough, and I know sometimes you walk here, but it's not because you have to. But we get here in modern transportation. We have modern communication. Is there anybody whose hand's itching because it's been 10 minutes since you text anyone? We've got all these modern sophisticated things, and we feel that we're beyond those who came 100, 150 years ago, and definitely we are more advanced than those ancient people that Jeremiah read with us about a few minutes ago. Those people who are used to explain some of the things that happened as the world came to be and as things began to be in the formation that we know them to be. Why are there so many different kinds of people, so many cultures, so many languages, so much diversity among the human race? Why is it like that? And we arrive at Genesis 11 and begin to get an idea of what God was thinking as God set in motion some of the things that we continue to see today, the differences and the similarities among people. As we read Genesis 11 and see these people, and just to refresh your memory, because it's been a few minutes since we read that, but the people, that's all we know about them, the people had arrived at a beautiful, fertile plain, and they decided to settle there. Now, the end of Genesis 10 tells us that the people were spreading out following the flood. The descendants of Noah were spreading out and inhabiting the whole earth, but then in Genesis 11, we come to a screeching halt. They decided to quit spreading out and decided to settle and build a beautiful city, a sophisticated city, a glamorous city, and build perhaps in the center of the city a giant tower so that that tower could be seen as far as they could travel. You see, the people were searching for something, I believe. They were searching for meaning for their lives, and that's a valid search. The people were searching for meaning because that does not go against God's wishes. We were created for purpose. Go back to the first page. Adam and then Eve came and they were placed by God in the garden to tend the garden. Even in that perfect garden, there was work to be done. It was not drudgery, but it was work. It was God-given work. It was God-ordained and God-blessed work. Work to take care of God's creation. To steward that creation. Generally, God's purpose for us And again, in general terms, sometimes it gets much more specific, but in general terms, God's purpose includes living for God and living for others. And notice the verb, living. God's purpose includes us living, buying into life, grasping and enjoying the life God gives us to live. The people were searching for meaning. They were desiring to make a name for themselves. They had not yet realized that the best name for ourselves is to be in relationship with our God, fulfilling whatever God desires of us. They wanted to build a city that everyone could celebrate because of its special nature, to build a name for themselves. And they also wanted, beyond meaning, they wanted security. We understand that, don't we? People want security. When is the last time you heard a political campaign that did not at some point discuss security? Whether it's a national, a state, or even a local campaign, we desire security. Some even pick a target people against which to rail in order to get the majority on their side as they campaign on security. Read about Hitler's rise to power prior to the Second World War to see how effectively that can be done. Well, Genesis shows us a people wanting to hold on to their sameness. They all use the same language and the same vocabulary. Not necessarily a bad thing, but as we'll see in the story, that was not God's intent for them to hold on to their sameness. They wanted to build a tower that could be seen from great distance, a tower that would serve to always lead us back home. They were seeking security. They were seeking to build their own security. People still do that, don't we? We build our own security. We even call one of our retirement programs what? Social Security. And I'm not about to get down on it. I hope it's still there in a few years. As you do. If they were building a tower they could see from any distance so they could come back to the familiar, to the things that they had always done and the way they had always done it. They wanted meaning. They wanted security, and they devised a plan that would allow them to meet their own needs. At least they thought their plan would result in them finding the meaning for which they searched and the security that they felt they needed. But surprise, God had other ideas. They wanted to cling together. And God said, it's time to come apart. Now, some see God's actions here as a judgment against the people who were attempting to run their own plan. But think with me for a moment the possibility that what we see here, not so much just judgment, though there's an aspect of judgment to it. Think about the possibility that what we see is God forcing a set of circumstances on the people so that God can achieve God's purpose in their lives. Again, Genesis 10 shows that God desired the diversity among the people. Nature shows us the value of diversity. The same plant will not grow in all environments, will it? Not even kudzu, as hard as that is to believe. God has created great diversity in nature. And of course, the flip side of that, the downside, the ugly side of that is that diversity helps us to explain some of the conflict in the world. Then, as now, people tend to look down on, be frightened of anyone who is different from them. But could it be? Think with me about this, please. Could it be that God knew diversity was good even for people? Imagine a world filled with people just like me. Now, I know that's a delight to think about, but think about it just a minute. A world full of people just like me. Would you want to live in it? Please don't make anybody answer that out loud. What about a world filled with people just like you? God created the world and desired some differences. And these people were working against that. And God scatters them, and scattering short circuits their plan to meet their own needs. Now, certainly that did have a judgmental aspect from God's part. The people were judged for their misjudgment of their ability to be the source of their own meaning and security. That may be the biggest lesson in here for us. The people really thought they could be the source of their own meaning and security. And God knew they could not. We still cannot. We see God looking over their work, and it was good work. But God was not frightened by their work. Rather, He saw their accomplishments as leading them to mistakenly assume they were capable of doing anything they set their collective minds to do. And when they got to that point of their development, they would lose any awareness of their need for God in their lives. With their sights set on building a city and a tower, there was no room in their lives for God. Nor was there any perception on their part of their need for God. So God scatters them. Not so much, I think, as punishment, but to ensure they realized they needed God for meaning and for security. You see, they could do a lot. They had the technology to build hardened brick which would hold up in that climate. They could build a magnificent city. They could have built a great tower. Just like us. With our intelligence and ingenuity, our training, our background, our collective abilities, we can get by very well in this world, at least according to this world's standards. God scattered them. Does God still scatter people? I think so. Especially those people who profess to love Him. Anytime we begin to believe it's about us, anytime we begin to believe that we can accomplish whatever we set out to based on our abilities, God will find a way to scatter. For God desires for us often things that are much greater than our plans for ourselves. So rather than seeing God's scattering as punishment, recognize that God's scattering may be His way of saving us from ourselves. So God's much bigger and better purpose can be recognized and fulfilled. Does that mean we shouldn't dream or plan or attempt anything bold? Absolutely not. Dream big dreams. Plan how to attempt great things. Plan to do much with your life. But as you do, be alert always and open always to the changes God may want you to make to your plans. The bigger dreams God may have for you, the tasks so great they do not register in your imagination. Now, it's hard to be open to that, though. It's hard to be open to that because God's changes require humility on our parts. Maybe I don't know what's best for me. Maybe my plans, which look so good on paper and are so impressive to my friends, maybe my plans are not as great as I think or as others say they are. Let me say it again. God does have a purpose and a plan for us. And it may be a grand plan, like building a city or raising a tower, Or it may be that God's plan for us at this point in our life is simply to enjoy God's goodness and give God the praise for the life He gives us today to enjoy. It's kind of like when you're hungry. When you're really, really hungry. And you have an opportunity to go to that all-you-can-eat buffet. You know, that's the one where you eat and you eat and you eat, and they finally come to you and say, that's all you can eat. They've never told you that. Now, an all-you-can-eat buffet will certainly satisfy your hunger. But so does a tomato sandwich. John, it's even better than a moon pie. White bread. It's the only time I eat white bread. White bread. Light mayo. Duke's Works. Light mayo. Thick slice, preferably of a heirloom tomato, and just a touch of salt. Don't mess it up with pepper. Some of you do that. Satisfies your hunger, won't it? Now, it's not near as sophisticated or as elaborate or dramatic as an all-you-can-eat buffet, but they both satisfy your hunger. Sometimes God's plans are grand. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet with 300 different choices. I think they count the peanuts on the nut aisle when they say 300. Or sometimes God's plan is just tomato sandwich simple. Just for today, to enjoy what God has given you. And sometimes when we're looking for that massive task, that elaborate, dramatic plan, we miss the simple pleasures of life God is granting us. We sometimes hear it, maybe you've said it, sometimes with more senior folk. I will hear, Jeremiah has heard, we will hear somebody say, God must have something for me to do or He wouldn't have left me here. Maybe. Maybe God's still got something dramatic for you to do, or maybe God simply purposes to bless you with life to live with your family and your friends so you can enjoy the lights of heaven early. Just being in fellowship with those you love and those who love you. And you know what? In enjoying the delights of simply being with those you love, you're a blessing to them as well. So look for the grand plan. Look for the dramatic plan. Look for the big goals. But don't miss the everyday life and living that God gives you. I would fail the Scriptures, though, if I left us thinking that God's plan was simply to scatter the people. The rest of the story is that God didn't end with the scattering. We move across history. We move across several years into Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost. Genesis begins with the good news, this is Genesis chapter 1, that we are created in the image of God. And so our highest purpose lies in trusting God and in loving God. The ancient people violated that trust in their overwhelming, inappropriate self-confidence, their independence that was seen at Babel. But then the Spirit comes in dramatic fashion at Pentecost. And we are reminded that those people, so ruined and distorted in their mistrust, have been restored to a position of trust in God through Jesus Christ. The ancients searched for meaning. They searched for purpose. They searched for security. And then God sent Jesus, and then God followed by the dramatic sending of His Spirit, and meaning was found as God gathered the people who had been scattered. He gathered the people through the work of the Holy Spirit. And now, instead of a scattering of languages, they all heard. Did you hear that? They all heard in their own language. The New Testament scholars are divided. Was it a miracle of speech or was it a miracle of hearing? And I say, who cares? God gathered the people and they heard in their own language. A reversal of Babel, in that God was now pulling people toward Him. And immediately after Pentecost, after that gathering, the church came together, and read about it in the next few chapters. The church came together and they got rid of most of the things that had separated them before the coming of Christ and before their coming to Christ. Those class distinctions, especially those that were the result of a wide difference of income, those things were done away. They pooled their money, they pooled their resources, and they gave them out as people needed them. And all those old ways of looking at others with suspicion disappeared. It didn't last. You see, there's an ongoing battle, struggle between Babel and Pentecost, between scattering and gathering. A few chapters later in Acts, we see some of those new Christians calling for the even newer Christians to become more like them, or they wouldn't really be Christians. Let's don't give up just because Babel still raises that tower all along. God's blessing at Pentecost, including allowing each person to hear the good news in his or her own language. And what was that good news? That good news was that Jesus died and rose again to pave the way for salvation. Salvation in Christ, the real road to meaning and security. And for many people that day, their response to the invitation of the good news about Jesus was yes. They learned, as Joel the prophet had proclaimed so many years before, that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. At the end of chapter 2 in Acts, we read, those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. The Spirit brought new life, new meaning, new reality to those people. Now, they didn't make a name for themselves, but they were given a name. A name that began as a term of derision for some of those early Christians, but a name they embraced soon, the name Christian. Little Christs is what it means. They embraced it then, and we embrace it now. The name we have been given because we follow Christ, the name that gives meaning to our lives beyond anything else. Not only did they find a new name, but they found security. They found security in the promise of an eternal relationship with Creator God. Friend, I hope you are secure in your relationship with God. I hope you know that security that comes through Christ. If not, let's talk about it. We can talk about it now in the next few moments in our time of commitment, or you can contact me in the next few days, and we will talk about what it means to be secure in Christ. But now we'll stand together and we'll sing a song of commitment, and while we're singing, if you want to share with me and with this church family a commitment you're in process of making or you've already made, commitment to unite with this church family, a commitment of your life to Jesus Christ, come and share that with me, and I'll help you share it with the church as we stand and sing.